At the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Morris coldly pushed the divorce agreement in front of me. 3 years married into their family, unable to bear a single child. This was my only crime and his reason for making me leave empty-handed. He didn't even bother to glance at me, his thin lips uttering 4 words. We go our separate ways. I picked up the pen, but my fingertips trembled violently. 3 years of effort, 3 years of humiliation, only to be exchanged for a thin sheet of paper. I could see Morris already turning away in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling glass. Outside, his first love was waiting for him. Summoning all my strength, I signed my name on the last page. Yara. I had written these 2 words countless times, yet never felt so unfamiliar. When the clerk stamped the document and handed me the red divorce certificate, my world turned completely gray. At that very moment, the phone in my pocket suddenly rang. I numbly answered the call, and a joyful voice came through the receiver. Yara, your test results from last week are in. The HCG levels confirm pregnancy. Congratulations. I nearly fainted on the spot, the phone slipping from my powerless fingers. This child came too late, and the mistake was too outrageous. Because his father was not my recently divorced ex-husband, Morris. It was Morris's own brother, Chen. That rainy night 3 months ago. Outside the window, thunder roared, and the downpour battered the floor-to-ceiling glass, blurring the entire world. Morris had been on a business trip for a week. In the empty villa, I was alone, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Just as I was about to go upstairs, the doorbell rang abruptly. A flicker of joy stirred in my heart. I thought Morris had come back early. Was he trying to surprise me? I almost ran to open the door, my face carrying an anticipation even I hadn't noticed. The door opened. But standing outside wasn't Morris. It was his brother, Chen. He was drenched, the heavy stench of alcohol mixed with the icy chill of rain hitting me in the face. His handsome face was flushed unnaturally red, his eyes unfocused, clearly drunk to the point of unconsciousness. Chen? What are you? Before I could finish, his tall frame suddenly leaned forward, pinning me firmly against the door. Sorry, his deep voice was filled with pain, hot breath spraying against my ear. I'm sorry. Sorry, don't go, don't leave me. Sorry was his ex-girlfriend from years ago. So he had mistaken me for her. My heart jolted, and I hurriedly pushed him away. Chen, look clearly, I'm not sorry, I'm Yara. But my explanation sounded so weak and pale to his drunken state. It was as if he didn't hear me, only holding me tighter, as if trying to fuse me into his very bones. The next second, his burning lips pressed down on mine. That night became a nightmare I dared not recall. The next morning, after Chen sobered up, he looked at the messy bed and my disheveled clothes, his face instantly turning pale. The shock and regret in his eyes were like a knife, cutting me to the core. He didn't say a word more, only awkwardly and nervously apologized before fleeing in haste. Between us, a strange unspoken agreement formed. Neither of us mentioned that absurd night again, as if by keeping silent, it never happened. A few days later, Morris returned. I tried to subtly probe our relationship, only to be met with his increasingly blatant coldness and impatience. It wasn't until I found another woman's lipstick in his car that I finally understood. It turned out that while I was desperately clinging to the prison of our marriage, he had long been out there, courting his first love under the moonlight. How ridiculous. I was holding on to a husband who didn't love me, yet by some cruel twist of fate, I was carrying his own brother's child. The cold diagnosis slipped from my fingertips, drifting softly. In the end, it landed silently at my feet. My mind buzzed, blank and empty. All the sounds around me vanished, leaving only the harsh white lights of the hospital corridor, stabbing painfully at my eyes. I bent down, trying to pick it up, but my body stiffened, refusing to obey. Trapped, unable to move forward or back. That phrase had never been so deeply etched into my life. Tell Morris? No, I couldn't bear to imagine such a scene. A woman who had just been cast out for infertility turns around and is pregnant with his brother's child. It was the most absurd, most vicious joke in the world. But if I don't say anything, what about the child in my belly? I instinctively placed my hand on my flat abdomen. Inside, a small life was quietly growing. He was innocent. How am I supposed to face him? Should I let him be born without a father, burdened with a vague and unclear origin? It feels as if a piece of my chest has been ripped open, the pain so sharp I can hardly breathe. I thought of Chen. I remembered that rainy night, his bloodshot eyes from drunkenness, and the name he kept murmuring over and over. Sorry. Sorry. The one he loved was never me. I was just a mistaken substitute in his darkest, most vulnerable moments. How tragic, and how ironic. The arrival of this child is not a joy, but a loud slap, striking my face hard, reminding me of that night's madness and disgrace. I cannot stay. Absolutely not. Once this thought took hold, it grew wildly like weeds, instantly consuming all my thoughts. Yes, I must leave here. Leave this city that has humiliated me, leave these two men who have caused me so much pain. I staggered to my feet, summoning all my strength to pick up that thin piece of paper. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket, as if tucking away a past that should never have existed. I returned to the marital home I once shared with Morris, now nothing but an empty shell with only me left inside. I felt no attachment whatsoever. Opening the wardrobe, I only packed a few clothes I had bought myself. I didn't touch a single item Morris had added. Dragging my small suitcase, I looked around. This place I once thought of as home now seemed nothing more than a gilded cage. Finally, I sat at the desk and took out paper and pen. Chen, that night was a mistake, and so was the arrival of this child. But I will bear this mistake alone and raise him. From now on, mountains and rivers apart, may we each find peace, no need to seek us out again. No signature. He would know it was me. I folded the letter paper neatly, placed it in the most conspicuous spot by the entrance, then without looking back, I pulled my suitcase and walked out through the door I had once entered with hopeful anticipation. The airport was brightly lit, and flight information echoed over the speakers. I held the one-way ticket to a small southern town, my palms drenched in cold sweat. Through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, I took one last look at the city's nightscape. Neon lights flickered, dazzling and brilliant. But not a single light shone for me. Morris, Chen. I have recorded every pain and humiliation you have caused me, Yara. Goodbye is not farewell forever. I lowered my head, gently caressing my belly, the last trace of vulnerability in my eyes replaced by resolute determination. Baby, don't be afraid, Mommy will protect you. 5 years. I gave myself a deadline. In 5 years, I will definitely return. With my child in tow, standing proudly on this land in a way that makes everyone look up to us. Let those who once underestimated me and hurt me see clearly. I, Yara, am no one's accessory, nor am I dust to be trampled upon. 5 years later, at the Capital International Airport. I took off my sunglasses, holding the hand of a delicate little boy, walking through the bustling arrivals hall. My 4-year-old son, Asher, tilted his little face up, curiously observing everything around him. By the time he was 3, he had already mastered Chinese, English, and French fluently, filled with a curiosity and insight beyond his years. What was even more striking was that little face of his, as if it had been sculpted by scaling down Chen's features perfectly. I tightened my grip on his hand, about to head toward the exit, when a familiar yet panicked voice called out from behind. Yara? I paused, but didn't turn around. Morris's assistant, Hank, hurriedly rushed up to me, his gaze fixed tightly on Asher beside me, the color draining from his face at a visibly rapid pace. His lips trembled, shocked to the point of barely being able to form complete words. Asher, however, was very polite. He lifted his head and crisply called out, "Hello, Uncle." That simple "hello, Uncle" completely stunned Hank. It was as if he had been scalded. He abruptly stepped back, fumbling to pull out his phone and dial a number. The call was answered almost instantly. Hank's voice was trembling uncontrollably. He covered the microphone and lowered his voice, but I could still hear him clearly. Mr. Morris. I'm at the airport, and I saw the ex-madam. There was a second of silence on the other end, then Morris's cold and impatient voice came through. What does her coming back have to do with me? Hank glanced at Asher, swallowed hard with difficulty, his voice breaking with sobs. No. No. Mr. Morris, she's with a child, a boy. As the words fell, there was a deathly silence on the other end of the line. I could almost picture Morris's expression at that moment. A few seconds later, a voice trembling uncontrollably roared through the receiver. Keep an eye on her. Don't let her leave. I curled my lips coldly, bent down to pick up Asher, and turned to leave. Unfortunately, I was still a step too late. A figure came charging out of the VIP passage like a madman, pushing through the crowd, and threw himself in front of me without hesitation. It was Morris. 5 years apart, he was still handsome, but there was now a weariness and world-weariness in his eyes that I couldn't understand. His gaze passed over me and locked tightly onto Asher's face in my arms. When he saw Asher's face, so strikingly similar to Chen's, every emotion in his eyes froze instantly, then shattered bit by bit. His complexion turned paler than paper in an instant. Morris's breath suddenly caught. It was as if his throat had been strangled, each word squeezed out through clenched teeth, trembling uncontrollably. This child, whose is he? I held Asher in my arms, looking down at him, a slight curve tugging at the corner of my lips. Mr. Morris, after 5 years, you still like to ask such foolish questions you already know the answer to. Asher blinked his big, bright black eyes, curiously studying the uncle before him whose face was paler than paper. His soft little hand patted my cheek, and in a babyish voice he asked, Mommy, why is this uncle almost crying? Morris's body shook violently. His gaze was fixed tightly on Asher's face, as if trying to bore a hole through that delicately sculpted little face. The eyebrows, the nose bridge, and the stubborn curve of his pressed lips. Frame by frame, scene by scene, they perfectly matched the Chen from his memories of youth. No, impossible. Absolutely impossible. That thought clung to him like a lifeline, grasped desperately in the madness of near drowning. His hands began to tremble, shaking so violently that even the sharp lines of his suit blurred. I watched coldly as he tore himself apart, then, with deliberate calm, delivered the final blow. Baby, why don't you introduce yourself to Uncle? Asher was polite, he spoke clearly, Hello, Uncle, my name is Asher. The last shred of hope was blown to smithereens. Morris's face shifted from deathly pale to iron blue, then to ashen gray. He suddenly lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes fixed on me with a fierce glare, his voice hoarse like a worn-out bellows. Yara! How dare you cheat during our marriage? Hearing this impotent rage accusation, I finally couldn't help but let out a low laugh. The laughter was full of mockery and disdain. I slowly leaned down, moved close to his ear, and in a voice only the two of us could hear, whispered. Morris, that lipstick in your car, it's from your first love, isn't it? When I was desperately begging you to give me a child, where were you? Now, what right do you have to question me? Just as Morris's world was collapsing, a steady and powerful set of footsteps cut through the noisy crowd. The sound came from afar, each step seeming to press on my heartbeat. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Chen. He wore a sharply tailored dark gray suit, standing tall and dignified, his aura commanding, a stark contrast to the nearly broken Morris beside him. His gaze, like an invisible blade, sliced through the crowd and landed precisely on Asher, cradled in my arms. In that instant, I clearly saw all the calm and composed expressions on his face freeze completely. Time seemed to stand still. His entire body stiffened on the spot, like a statue instantly turned to stone. But Asher in my arms was unafraid, he blinked those eyes so much like Chen's and politely waved his little hand at him. Hello, Uncle. The clear, crisp child's voice was like a stone thrown into a deep pool, stirring up a towering wave in Chen's dead, silent eyes. Shock, bewilderment, disbelief, and a trace of panic and anticipation even he hadn't noticed in himself. His gaze flickered back and forth between my face and Asher's, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. He took step after step toward me, his footsteps unsteady, as if all his strength had been drained. He stopped in front of me, his tall figure completely enveloping both me and Asher. He stared intently at Asher, his eyes swirling with a complex emotion I couldn't decipher, his voice hoarse to the point of losing its tone. "Is he, our child?" He didn't say my, but our. I met his probing gaze, my heart gripped tightly by an invisible hand. Then, I nodded. A slight movement, yet it became the final straw that broke Morris. "No." Morris let out a beast-like roar, his eyes bloodshot, charging at Chen like a madman. "Chen. Why? Why are you doing this to me?" He grabbed Chen's collar, fists raining down like hail, wild and desperate in their frenzy. "She's my wife. She's my wife." The airport hall erupted into chaos. Flashbulbs popped, screams pierced the air. Chen didn't fight back, letting Morris's fists batter him, his eyes fixed on me, filled with endless regret and pain. Two once exalted darlings of the heavens, now like two trapped beasts, performing the most humiliating spectacle under the watchful eyes of all. I watched everything before me coldly, my heart as still as water. I lowered my head, covering Asher's eyes with my hand, burying his little face in the hollow of my neck, shutting out all the ugliness and disgrace of this world. "Baby, let's go home." Holding my son, I turned and squeezed out of the chaotic crowd without a trace of hesitation. The sounds of tearing, shouting, and questioning behind me became the soundtrack to my resolute departure. "Morris, Chen. 5 years ago, you turned my life upside down. 5 years later, the fire you ignited with your own hands must be borne by you alone. I will no longer be drawn into any disputes of the Morris family. But deep down, I know they won't let me and my child go so easily." Morris still found my place of residence. It took only 3 days. He stood outside my apartment door, his expensive suit dust-streaked, a blue stubble creeping along his jaw, and bloodshot eyes. It looked as if he hadn't slept for days and nights. Those eyes that once only showed me impatience and coldness were now locked onto me tightly, swirling with madness and struggle. "Yara. I want to do a paternity test." He barely forced the words out through clenched teeth. I didn't even lift an eyelid, just turned aside and stepped away from the doorway. "Fine." My calmness was like a bucket of ice water poured over the last flicker of hope burning inside him. He swayed, staring at me in disbelief. He probably thought I'd panic, refuse, or hide behind all sorts of excuses. But I didn't. Because in my hand, I held the sharpest knife, and absolute confidence. That child was never his. I watched him follow me in a daze to the paternity testing center. The 3 days waiting for the results were hell for him. For me, it was just a matter of handling a few work emails and building a new Lego model with my son. When the report came back, I didn't even go to get it myself. Morris brought it back on his own. Like a walking corpse, he held that thin piece of paper and walked into my apartment. I was sitting on the carpet with Asher, reading picture books, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warm and peaceful. He stood there, his tall figure blocking all the sunlight, casting a shadow. The paternity report that sentenced him to death slipped from his trembling fingers, fluttering down. Finally, it floated lightly to rest at his feet. He stared fixedly at me and Asher, a hoarse, trapped animal wail coming from his throat. Then, under my gaze, the man who once thought himself invincible, who considered even glancing at me a waste of time, suddenly buckled at the knees. With a soft thud, he knelt before me. Completely broken. He knelt on the ground, his forehead pressed against the cold floor, his shoulders shaking violently as he let out stifled sobs of utter despair. "Tell me. Yara, please, tell me the truth. Why, in the end?" I put down the picture book in my hand, letting Asher play in his room by himself, then looked down at the pitiful man sprawled on the floor. I slowly crouched to meet his gaze. "Morris, do you remember that rainy night 5 years ago when you were on a business trip?" He suddenly lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes filled with confusion. I spoke softly, each word like a poisoned blade, piercing precisely into his heart. That night, the thunder was loud, and the rain was heavy. Your brother Chin showed up at the villa door, soaking wet and drunk. He mistook me for someone else. As I finished speaking, the color drained completely from Morris's face in an instant. He seemed to have all the bones drained from his body, collapsing weakly to the ground, his lips trembling but unable to utter a single word. He understood. He understood everything. The wife he had personally driven away, using infertility as an excuse, was spending the night out with his own brother. Watching him in such unbearable agony, I felt not a flicker of sympathy. If anything, it struck me as somewhat ridiculous. Do you now realize just how absurdly wrong you were? I stood up, no longer looking at him. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and standing there was Chen. He was much more composed than Morris, but the furrowed brows and the weariness in his eyes still betrayed the torment within him. His gaze passed over me and landed on Morris, who was kneeling on the ground, his pupils suddenly contracting sharply. Then, his eyes turned to me, hoarse with an almost pleading tone. Yara, I want to do a paternity test too. I nodded. The result was, unsurprisingly, conclusive. When Chin received the report confirming that Asher was indeed his biological son, I saw his tense body instantly relax. He stared at the paper for a long, long time. The emotions in his eyes were incredibly complex. There was the relief of closure, the irreparable guilt, and a trace of something even he hadn't realized yet, a father's quiet pride and joy. Morris knelt there, his forehead pressed firmly against the cold floor, his whole body like a puddle of mud. The man who once couldn't even be bothered to glance at the divorce papers was now pleading with me in a nearly torn sob. Yara, he lifted his head, his handsome face streaked with tears and despair, his bloodshot eyes gripping me as if I were his only lifeboat. I was wrong. I really was wrong. Please forgive me, okay? He crawled forward, trying to grab the hem of my pants, but I stepped back in disgust, evading him. I'll give you everything. Shin's shares, all the properties under my name, the car, the cash, all of it to you. I'll walk away with nothing, I just want you to forgive me. His voice was hoarse, filled with a humble plea. I looked down on him from above, as if watching a clown making a fool of himself, then let out a very light laugh. That laugh was cold, like an ice pick, instantly piercing through all his hysteria. Morris. I slowly crouched down to meet his disheveled gaze, asking him word by word, 5 years ago, when you used the charge of infertility to sentence me to leave empty-handed, did you ever think I cared about your money? His body trembled violently, his lips quivering, unable to utter a single word. These 5 years. I've lived worse than death. He seemed to grasp at a final straw, painfully confessing, Suri, she left with someone else long ago for money. I stayed guarding that empty house, only then did I realize what I truly lost. I only realized how good you were. I think about you every day, Yara, I'm going crazy. Hearing that name, the last trace of warmth in my eyes vanished completely. So? I asked calmly, your life being worse than death is the price you pay for your own foolishness. Your first love left because you were blind and chose the wrong person. What does any of this have to do with me? I stood up, dusted off the non-existent dust, and with a tone of stating facts, pronounced his death sentence. Morris, I am no longer the Yara who waited bitterly in the villa 5 years ago, longing for you to come home and beg for a scrap of your love. The me now doesn't need any of your property, nor your cheap regret that arrived 5 years too late. He completely broke down, clutching his hair, letting out a desperate, beast-like wail. We can start over. Yara. Give me one more chance. I walked to the door, opened it, and looked at him coldly. Start over? There was a sharp edge of scorn in my voice. With those 4 words you threw in my face when you forced the divorce, each go their own way? Is it still because of your first love that you personally dragged our marriage, down to hell? Morris, tell me. What right do you have? 3 days after I locked Morris out, Chin found me downstairs. Unlike Morris, who had lost control in a frenzy, Chen stood quietly under a ginkgo tree. His tall figure stretched long under the evening streetlight, exuding a silent pressure. When he saw me, he stubbed out his cigarette and walked over, stopping about 3 steps away. A restrained yet distant space. Yara. His voice was hoarser than a few days ago. I want to take responsibility as a father, for Asher, for my son. He chose his words carefully, using the term responsibility. I looked at him calmly, my heart completely unmoved. No need. My voice was soft, yet like an insurmountable wall standing between us. For the past 5 years, I alone have been able to afford his food, clothing, and expenses. When he was sick with a cold, I was the one who carried him to the hospital. His world is small and simple, just having me as his mother is enough. I paused, my gaze coldly sweeping over his face, etched with exhaustion and struggle. He's doing well. He doesn't need a father who's 5 years late to come and disrupt the life the two of us have. My refusal was too blunt, and a flicker of shock flashed in Chen's eyes, quickly replaced by a deeper sense of helplessness. He stepped forward, his breath tinged with urgency. Give me a chance to make it right, Yara. Let's get married. He seemed to think this was the best solution. Give the child a legitimate identity, a complete family. Hearing this, I finally couldn't help but let out a very light laugh. That smile never reached my eyes, instead, it felt like it was frozen in ice. A complete family? I lifted my eyes, staring straight into his unfathomable gaze, asking each word deliberately. Chen, are you pitying me? Or trying to make up for the mistake you made on that absurd rainy night? Or perhaps, you just want to use the paper of marriage to soothe the sudden flood of fatherly love inside you, and that guilt that shouldn't even exist? Each question made his already pale face grow even paler. His Adam's apple bobbed as he spoke with difficulty, none of that. Yara, that night was my fault, I can't deny it. But the moment I saw Asher, I realized. I really want to be a father. A real father in every sense. There was a trace of a plea in his voice, one even he hadn't noticed himself. I withdrew my gaze, my tone returning to its original coldness. You're late. The air seemed to freeze. After a long moment, he found his voice again, as if to confirm one last thing. Do you still love Morris? I shook my head, as if brushing off dust that wasn't even there on a piece of clothing. I haven't loved him for a long time. But, I lifted my head to meet his complicated eyes, giving him my final answer, I will never love you. Chen, don't mistake guilt for affection. My life, my child, have nothing more to do with your family. Asher and I sat cross-legged on the soft wool carpet, piecing together a complex starry sky puzzle. He kept his head down, focused, his long lashes casting a delicate shadow under the light. During this time, Morris and Chen seemed to have an unspoken agreement, one would come during the day, the other at night, each showing up beneath my apartment building with various clumsy excuses. I never accepted a single thing they sent. I didn't believe a single word they said. I thought I had made my resolve clear enough to make them back off. But I forgot, there was still a 4-year-old human child by my side. Mom. Asher fitted the last piece of the deep blue puzzle into the frame, looking up with his small face. Those eyes, so much like Chen's, were filled with a clarity beyond his years. Why do those 2 uncles downstairs keep coming to see us? My fingertips stiffened, a puzzle piece slipped from my hand and lightly tapped the floor with a dull sound. I forced myself to pick it up calmly, but I didn't dare meet my son's eyes. How was I supposed to explain? That one uncle made your mom leave with nothing? The other gave you life but burdened you with this absurd origin? I didn't want him to know a single word about the filth and shame of the adult world. I steadied myself and forced a smile. They are friends my mom used to know. The answer was pale and weak, even I wasn't convinced. Asher, unsurprisingly, didn't believe it. He tilted his little head, looking at me with those stark black and white eyes, carrying a hint of all-knowing clarity. He was silent for a moment, then in a very serious tone, he gently asked, Mom, that taller uncle. My heart suddenly tightened. Is he my dad? Boom. I felt my world shatter into pieces in that instant. The walls I had painstakingly built, the coldness I used to disguise myself, crumbled instantly in the face of my son's innocent question. I stood frozen, as if all the blood in my body had congealed at that moment. Asher looked at my pale face, his small brows furrowing slightly. He reached out his warm little hand and gently touched my cheek. Realizing he had said the wrong thing, he quickly corrected himself. Mom, don't be sad. Actually, just having you, Mom, is enough. He rested his little head on my knee, nuzzling softly, his voice tender and sweet. I think so too, Mom is the best. Tears welled up in my eyes instantly, and with all my strength, I forced back the overwhelming sting. I held him tightly, as if embracing the whole world. But just when I thought this chapter could finally be closed, the little one in my arms spoke again, softly. That voice was faint, yet like the sharpest knife, it pierced straight into my most vulnerable heart. But, if that uncle really is Dad, I hope he can be a little kinder to Mom. He looked up, his eyes clear as crystal, and stared at me, each word sharp and unmistakable. Because, Mom, you look so tired. The night was as dark as ink, turning the tree beneath the apartment into a deep, somber silhouette. I stood in that shadow, watching Chen with cold indifference. He finally spoke, his voice rough as if sanded down, every word painfully strained. That night. He paused, as if searching for a less cruel way to say it, but in the end, he chose the bare, brutal truth. I was indeed drunk. And I did mistake you for Suri. My chest didn't ache as I had expected, instead, a numb chill spread through me. So, being mistaken for a substitute, no matter how many times you hear it, is always just as absurd, just as laughable. He stared at me intently, as if trying to find the slightest flicker of emotion on my face, but he failed. My face was as calm as a stagnant pool. This only deepened the pain in his eyes. He took a step forward, a hint of urgency in his voice. But the next morning, when I woke up and looked at you, his Adam's apple bobbed violently, as if the scene was right before his eyes. I regretted it. Yara, what I regret isn't that ridiculous thing, nor is it because you are Morris's wife. He fixed his gaze on me, his eyes swirling with the storm he had suppressed for 5 years. What I regret is that I hurt you. I saw the fear and brokenness in your eyes, and in that moment, I realized what I had truly done. I didn't just hurt a symbol, an identity, I hurt you, Yara. These words carried more weight than Morris's hysterical cries. But so what? The damage had already been done, and no amount of eloquent words could change that fact. Seeing my indifference, the last flicker of hope in his eyes began to waver. These 5 years, his voice hoarse, not a single day has passed without me thinking about that night. I wasn't thinking about Suri, nor Morris. What I thought about was, if that morning, I hadn't chosen to flee in panic, but instead stayed, chose honesty, chose to take responsibility. A trace of bitter self-mockery tore through his voice. Would we not be suffering like this now? We? I finally spoke, softly repeating the word, a faint, cutting smirk curling at my lips. Chen, don't use the word we. I lifted my eyes, my cold gaze like a scalpel, precisely dissecting all his self-righteous confessions. The one who's suffering is only me. And you, I said, watching his face turn pale in an instant, you're just uneasy and guilty over your own loss of control and cowardice. Don't disguise your guilt as belated affection. I stepped forward, standing before him, and with a voice only the two of us could hear, I pronounced each word clearly and deliberately. The past, to me, is nothing but a filthy accident that must be completely forgotten. Your so-called truth means nothing to me. And your so-called regret is laughably cheap. I watched his body stiffen completely, the light in his eyes shatter, then turned away without a trace of hesitation. We don't need to look forward. Because between you and me, there never was a future. When the door to my house was knocked, I was playing on the carpet with Asher. Standing outside was an elderly man with graying hair, yet sharp and vigorous, his eyes piercing like an eagle's. He wore a dark tang suit with traditional Chinese frog buttons, holding a string of glossy, polished Buddhist prayer beads, commanding respect without raising his voice. He was Chan and Morris's father, the true power behind the Shin group, Ben. His gaze swept past me like a spotlight, locking precisely onto Asher standing behind me. In that instant, his pupils trembled. Asher's face was the undeniable mark of the Morris family's genes. "You are Yara," he spoke, his voice aged but full of strength, carrying an unchallengeable command. I didn't answer, calmly shielding Asher behind me, blocking his scrutinizing gaze. The child must return to our family. Ben didn't beat around the bush, he stated his purpose directly. Our bloodline cannot be scattered outside. His tone was not one of negotiation but an unalterable decree. I smiled, softly, coldly. Ben, you might be mistaken. I looked straight into those sharp, lifelong shrewd eyes, speaking each word with crystal clarity. My son, his name is Asher, and he has nothing to do with your family. Ben's facial muscles twitched, his gaze suddenly turning icy cold. Looks like you won't shed a tear until you see the coffin. The prayer beads in his hand stopped spinning, and the oppressive atmosphere instantly grew heavy. I'll give you two choices. 1. You take the child and come home with me. I can overlook your past and give you a legitimate status. 2. I use legal means to regain custody of the child. He stared at me as if looking at an ant he could crush at will. Yara, think carefully. If you take me to court, you don't stand a chance. I lowered my eyelids and gently stroked Asher's head. Then let's try. My calmness completely enraged him. Just as he was about to lose control, the elevator doors dinged open. Chan and Morris stepped out, one after the other. They saw Ben at the door, and their faces changed instantly. Dad, what are you doing here? Chen stepped forward quickly, positioning himself between me and Ben. Seeing his two sons, Ben's anger flared even more, he slammed his cane heavily on the ground. If I don't come, you two will disgrace our family completely. He glared at Chen, then turned to the pale-faced Morris. You two, right now, immediately, bring this woman and child back home. The air was deathly silent. Morris's body trembled as he looked at me, his eyes full of pain and pleading. The first to speak was Chen. He took a deep breath, met his father's furious gaze, his voice steady but resolute. Dad, the child is better off with Yara than back at our home. Ben stared in disbelief. What did you say? Our home is too complicated, not a place for a child to grow up innocent. Yara can take good care of him. I respect her decision. You unfilial son. Ben trembled with anger. He suddenly turned to Morris and shouted harshly, and you? Morris. Are you going to go against me for this woman too? All eyes focused on Morris. He closed his eyes in pain, and when he opened them again, those bloodshot eyes held only a resolute determination, as if burning his bridges. He walked over to me and, facing his father, spoke each word deliberately. Dad, I'm the one who wronged Yara. I was the one who pushed her away with my own hands. Now, I can't let her and the child suffer even the slightest injustice. He looked at me, his voice hoarse. Whatever her decision is, I will support it. Even if it means I never see them again. Ben staggered back a step, barely able to hold on to his cane. Seeing these two sons openly betray him for a woman, his blood boiled, and his old face turned the color of a pig's liver. Go, go, go. He said good 3 times in a row, pointing at us, his hands trembling uncontrollably. You will all regret this. The day after Ben left, I was splashed across the front pages of every media outlet in the most degrading and humiliating way. A candid photo taken from a tricky angle trapped Chen, Morris, and me in a single frame. In the picture, Chen stood in front of me, his expression tense. Morris was gripping my wrist, his eyes bloodshot, looking utterly mad. I was caught in the middle, my face betraying an unmasked coldness and detachment. The headline, written in blood-red letters, screamed, "Shocking scandal in the elite, Shin brothers turn against each other, openly fighting over a mysterious woman." Overnight, I became the biggest joke in the city. All my information was dug up from the darkest corners of the internet and exposed like trash. Morris's ex-wife. A woman cast aside on the grounds of infertility. And now, she had returned with a child who looked strikingly like Chen. The online abuse was overwhelming, as if they wanted to tear me apart alive. A scheming bitch among scheming bitches, still entangled with her ex-husband's family after the divorce. Isn't it all just about the money? A woman who can't have children, how does she suddenly have a son 5 years later? The more you think about it, the scarier it gets. Don't be foolish upstairs, haven't you seen who the child looks like? This woman's level is too high. When she can't get the younger brother, she goes after the older one, a grand chess game. Poisonous woman. To marry into a wealthy family, she doesn't even spare her own uncle, utterly shameless. My phone was bombarded, curse messages from unknown numbers filled my inbox. I calmly blocked one, and 10 more popped up. I turned off my phone, unplugged the internet, completely isolating Asher and myself from the outside world. Asher seemed to sense something. He anxiously clung to my arm, looking up with his little face and asked, "Mommy, why do we have to hide?" I touched his head, my heart gripped by an icy hand, aching so fiercely I felt like I was suffocating. The thing I feared most had happened. I was afraid that the filth of this adult world would taint his pure eyes. Just as I thought I was about to be completely overwhelmed by this tidal wave of public opinion, Chen held a press conference. The outdoor screens across the entire city were broadcasting it live. On a whim, I turned on the TV. On the screen, Chen wore a black suit, his face more haggard than I had ever seen, but his eyes were sharp as knives. He didn't waste a single word. Facing hundreds of flashing cameras, his voice was steady and resolute. The woman in the photo, Ms. Yara, is not some mysterious stranger. She is the mother of my son. That rainy night 5 years ago, I mistook the person and committed an unforgivable mistake. Over these years, she has raised the child alone, enduring countless hardships. And I, as a father, have been severely absent. All the faults lie with me alone. They have nothing to do with her, nor with my brother Morris. From today onward, any slander or harassment against Ms. Yara and the child will be pursued to the end by Shin Group's legal department, with no tolerance whatsoever. After he finished speaking, he bowed deeply. The entire world fell into a dead silence. I watched the resolute figure of that man on the television, feeling no emotion, no relief, only a sense of powerlessness and weariness, as if being dragged back into the mire once again. Immediately after, the next day, Morris also stepped forward. He posted a long article on his personal social platform. Between the lines were raw self-examinations and belated confessions drenched in blood. He admitted to his coldness and selfishness back then, admitted how cruelly he hurt me for the sake of so-called first love. All the tragedy stems from my foolishness and blindness. It was me who pushed away the best Yara in the whole world with my own hands. I deserve to die 1,000 deaths, I am unworthy of forgiveness. I only ask everyone to let her go, to let that innocent child go. All punishments should be directed at me. A grand performance of wealthy brothers competing to take responsibility was staged for the whole world to see. Each one more passionate than the last, each one more remorseful than the other. Through this, they quelled public opinion and protected me. But as I sat in the quiet living room, looking out the window, all I felt was bitter irony. 5 years ago, they joined forces to turn my life upside down. 5 years later, they teamed up again to stage a heartfelt drama of the prodigal son's return. I turned off the TV. And with it, I shut the door to my world completely. Chen, Morris. Your confessions are performances for the world to see. But my life is not. The storm of public opinion gradually subsided, thanks to their relentless self-exposure at any cost. The world grew quiet. And my world finally consisted of only Asher and me. That afternoon, the sunlight was just right. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, helping Asher piece together a huge star map. He kept his head down, his small fingers holding a deep blue puzzle piece, focused like a little craftsman. Long lashes cast a quiet shadow beneath his eyelids. My heart had never felt so soft and peaceful. Suddenly, he looked up, those eyes so much like Chen's, clear as a spring. "Mom," he asked softly. "Are you unhappy right now?" My fingertips stiffened, and a puzzle piece slipped from my hand. I forced a smile, but my voice was a little hoarse. "How could that be? Mom has you. I'm the happiest person in the world." Asher looked at me, his small brows furrowing slightly. He put down the puzzle piece, climbed over, and carefully cupped my face with his warm little hands. "But..." He leaned in close, speaking in an extremely serious tone, softly. "When Mom smiles, there are no stars in her eyes anymore." At that moment, all the hard shells I had forcibly built shattered with a crash. I held him tightly in my arms, burying my face in the nape of his small neck, tears silently rolling down. I thought I had hidden it well. It turned out that all my exhaustion and feigned strength were clearly reflected in the eyes of my 4-year-old son. The little one in my arms gently patted my back, comforting me like a little adult. "Mom, don't cry. From now on, I'll be your star." I cried for a long time, as if I needed to wash away all the grievances accumulated over these 5 years, no, these 8 years. Once the tears dried up, so did the past. I wiped my eyes, looked into my son's clear gaze, and made a decision. It wasn't to forgive anyone. Nor was it to reconcile with anyone. It was only for the pure starry sky reflected in my son's eyes. It was time for me to start over. Morris came to see me one last time a week later. He stood at the door, no longer frantic or broken, just so thin he looked deformed, his eyes hollow like a shell emptied of its soul. "I'm leaving," he said hoarsely. "To a faraway place, maybe, never to come back." I looked at him calmly, saying nothing. He gave a bitter smile, a smile more painful than tears. "Before I go, I have only one question." He stared at me intently, his eyes carrying the last trace of a humble plea. "Yara, can you forgive me?" I looked at him, suddenly finding this man before me terrifyingly unfamiliar. I shook my head. The light in his eyes instantly went out. "I don't hate you anymore." I heard my own voice, calm without a single ripple. "Morris, I stopped hating you a long time ago." He seemed to grasp at a lifeline, suddenly lifting his head. I met his gaze, word by word, completely shattering his last hope. "Because hatred takes strength, it takes emotion. And you no longer deserve to drain anything from me. Forgiveness is for those who can still stir waves in my heart. You..." I paused, delivering my final judgment. "You lost that right long ago." He staggered back a step, his face as pale as paper, as if my words had nailed him to the pillar of shame. I closed the door, cutting off all his despair. "There's no going back." Those 3 words, I was too tired to say them aloud anymore. After sending Morris, this past, away, I took the initiative to contact Chen. There was a silence lasting nearly half a minute on the other end of the line, as if he couldn't believe it. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe. He arrived early, still with that calm and reserved demeanor, but his tightly clenched coffee cup and the whitened knuckles betrayed him. "I think Asher needs to know his father exists," I said bluntly, leaving no room for small talk. He suddenly looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and ecstatic joy. I raised my hand, stopping him from speaking. "But I have conditions," I said, my voice cold and clear. "First, between us, there will always only be Asher's father and mother, nothing else. Second, you can see him, but only with my consent, and you must not interfere with the rhythm of our lives as mother and son. Third, and most importantly..." I stared straight into his deep eyes. "Don't try to make up for these 5 lost years with money or any material things. You can't fill that void. And I don't need you to." I watched his face shift unpredictably, from ecstasy to struggle, finally settling into a complex calm. He nodded, his Adam's apple moving with difficulty. "Okay." He said just one word, but it sounded like he was using every ounce of strength. "I promise you." I lifted the glass of plain water before me and took a sip. I knew this was only the beginning. A new chapter 1 had to open for my son. But this time I would set the rules. My life would no longer be anyone's pawn. On my first day at the new company, I was parachuted straight into the role of project director. The Yara who once had to check Morris's mood before buying a new dress in our marriage was dead and gone. Now standing here is Yara, the one who can leave a room full of industry elites speechless in a meeting. Relying on the experience and achievements I fought for in overseas markets over the past 5 years, I took just a week to completely command the entire department. The looks they gave me shifted from initial doubt to complete trust and awe. This is the life I want, to grip the reins of fate tightly in my own hands. The first parent-child meeting with Chen was arranged at the cafe downstairs from my office. He arrived half an hour early, sitting by the window with his back straight, not having touched the coffee in front of him. When I took Asher by the hand and walked in, he suddenly stood up, so eager he nearly knocked over his chair, his eyes shining brilliantly. Asher wasn't shy. He looked up with that face so much like Chen's and politely said, "Uncle." Chen's body visibly stiffened. The light in his eyes instantly dimmed, replaced by an indescribable sense of loss and bitterness. He probably expected me to teach the child to call him Dad. I pulled out a chair and sat down, pushing the menu toward Asher with a calm tone. "You only have half an hour." His Adam's apple bobbed as he reached into the pocket of his tailored suit and carefully slid a beautifully wrapped gift box in front of Asher. "Asher, this is a gift for you." It was a limited edition Lego set. Asher glanced at me. I didn't nod, so he didn't reach out to take it. I lifted the glass of water before me, not even sparing the box a glance. "Chen, I warned you. My son lacks nothing." My voice was soft, yet it cut through all his cautious probing like a knife. His hand awkwardly hung in midair, neither retreating nor lowering it. On his usually composed face, for the first time, there was a look of embarrassment and helplessness. As for Morris, he resembled a lingering ghost even more than Chen did. The upscale apartment I live in has tight security. He can't get in, so every day he drives and parks on the street opposite my company. From dawn until late at night. My assistant Chip hesitated several times before telling me, "Yara, Morris seems to be there again." I just glanced at the tiny silhouette of the car outside the window, then lowered my head and continued reviewing documents. From now on, no need to report this kind of thing to me. Until one time, I was coming back from the supermarket with Asher when I ran into him in the underground parking garage. He didn't know how he had sneaked in, scruffy and unshaven, with deep-set eyes and reeking of alcohol, blocking my car. "Yara," his eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse as he pleaded, "let me see him, just once, okay?" I shielded Asher behind me, my gaze as cold as ice. "Morris, if you keep pestering me, I'll call the police." He closed his eyes in pain, his tall frame trembling violently, and finally, under my icy stare, he stepped back slowly, clearing the way for me. That look of utter despair, as if abandoned by the whole world, even made Asher quietly ask me, "Mom, why is that man crying all the time?" I started the car and drove past him without looking away, my voice calm and steady. "Because he is someone who did wrong but will never be forgiven, a pitiful soul." That night, I finally finished the huge star map with Asher. He lay in my arms, his little finger pointing at the ceiling, his voice soft and childish, "Mom, look, we brought the whole universe home." I lowered my head and kissed his forehead. Outside the window, the city's myriad lights shone like a brilliant galaxy. And in my arms, I held my entire universe. As for those meteors that once plunged me into darkness, their best fate is to burn out in their own orbits, turning to dust. No longer intersecting with my world.